Bonnitta, dear, you're waiting, and maybe you're having some solutions of what you have heard so far. So welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm here in Northwest Connecticut on a beautiful spring day. So I imagine you all here and enjoying the sunshine and the bird song. I think I'll start out by being provocative. It's not unlike me. So that way you kind of get to know me. And well, first of all, I do want to say that I'm launching a we call it self-organizing learning experience rather than Dr. Mitra called a self-organized learning environment. So we're emphasizing the process nature of the experiment. And we're starting that this in 2 weeks, actually. I have an 8-week program. And so at the end of the summer, I'll have a lot more actual practical things to say about our experiment. But what I would like to offer this group is some kind of provocative comments. And it really, I didn't plan to start this way, but the conversation between Leif and Michelle kind of reached in me and kind of is drawing it out. So I would recommend strong self-reflection about the peer-to-peer movement chasing the knowledge economy. I think the knowledge economy is kind of done. And I think this is why the strategies that institutions are making now. I mean, they're dumping all their products, you can say, online. They're making everything free. They have these MOOCs. They have basically, if you understand the mindset of a knowledge entrepreneur, they're saying these are free. They're not worth anything to us anymore. I mean, these are provocative statements. I'm overemphasizing it. And so the question is, you know, what is coming at us in the future? What is the imaginative leap that this community should make in some of these experiments? In other words, if we have a design intent that is future forward, then we won't have this problem that Michelle just said in the sense that we're always racing against time. And so these are the kinds of questions we ask here at Alvalor because we run a process called Insight Practice. And so given this question, in terms of, so let me make some distinctions. For example, the knowledge economy right now is based upon the organizing, storage, and retrieval of known information, right? What is known. And machines are doing that for us really, really well. And they will probably be doing all of that for us in the very near future. So this is what Einstein predicted. So this is becoming a less and less of a value. And I think that's why institutions and governments don't care if there's MOOCs and all this stuff. I mean, they don't want to chase something that's being so quickly devalued. It's devalued just like everything else is because robots and machines are going to take care of it better. So the question is, what do we want to do? You know, we engage people that have the values of this community into creating the future through these kinds of initiatives, through these hyper-local centers of education. I mean, I agree with many of you. You know, we're not trying to get institutional affiliation. We're trying to start something as a living center of the future of education here at my home farm. So that's, I think, a very important question. We answer it in different ways. We answer it in the sense that what we think is the value in terms of the noosphere is innovation and insightful ideas, complete paradigm shift. And so that would be something that I would suggest those of you that are working on new schools to really take a good look at. What are the capacities What are the capacities that this generation needs? And I think these are capacities um, all around the world, and they take different forms. So an insight or a paradigm shift in Ecuador or Africa may be more like solving this transportation to value problem. In another area, it might be coming up with what I call the third term in economics. So that's one of the things, for example, we're looking at. There's assets, liabilities, and then there's a third term that should be incorporated in economics. So these are big ideas. They're easy to design. I think that this for me is what we should be designing education for in the future. And then the second, and I think that plays into some of what Leif was asking about futures. And the second thing I just want to say is there's a sense in which, and we could all have a long discussion about this, but in terms of talking about the commons, and if we talk about knowledge as a commons, again, when I hear that phrase, I think of it as something, known. What is known should be accessible. And I think that's true. We need universal access to the external storage networks of what is known. But what is the concept of commons with relative to what is not known, relative to the generation of new ideas, the generation of designs for the future of our children? What's the definition of commons there? And so I think it gets a little tricky because some of our definitions of peer-to-peer and commons are actually an obstacle to thinking into the terms of those. And so the work we're doing makes a distinction between peer-to-peer, which is in many cases understood as universal access to a commons, and then the interactions are static, so you interact with the commons and something comes back and stuff like that, versus true participatory interactions where the known external network is just a box you can draw from. And to have truly participatory commons means that these commons are enacted in real time by participation. And so those are kind of like two big ideas I just wanted to throw out there to give you an idea of what I would hope is a valuable contribution to the conversation.
Brilliant, Alice.
Phillipe, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
So, where are you now? Are you in Israel?
I'm back in Ramallah, in Palestine.
Okay.
And I really have to say I love the discussion so far, and especially what was Bonnitta bringing up. We have been pretty much working exactly with that. How can we don't see like knowledge or like education just being like based on knowledge, but really on experience, and experience in systems and fields where everybody can participate. It should be included in a way of that everybody already brings a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills that is needed in any terms. And it's also the way how we see, or what we very much realize over the last 2, 3, 4 years is that we also have right now very much a clash of generations. So a generation which is now still very much socialized, very much educated, within an education system that is pretty much on a competitive base, on a base of like proving that what you know that's worth it, that you compete with systems around you in order to show that it's the best solution. And I'm not sure if there is really a best solution in where it's going. There might not be just a bottom-up and a top-down approach in order to change the education system. In our networked society, it will come from many places at the same time, with similar values, different ways of really, the change will be very chaotic. And in order of really like getting the experience or like the opportunity to deal with this change and to be able to, very often we also have the feeling that we have to create a change, and I hardly believe that we create a change. We will be part of the change. We will be part of the transformation. And I think for us it's very much to understand how do we get the experience to not be overrun by this information which is coming up. And this is what we see very much in the clash of the generations. Young kids around 20, people in the new generation around 20 to 20, 30 years old, they very often are not so interested in those discussions. Is this a commons? Is it not? Is it who does it belong to? Who do I trust? They have a very natural. Many people we work with, they have a very natural, very authentic form of trust, of immediate trust to people. And this is also what I see is very much needed in our network society, that we understand the level of trust. It's not only by grades or what we see is visible, but also your inner strength, your inner way of really your inner strength, your inner will of really being able to depth in the unknown, in the way of really like being able to accumulate knowledge and information around you very quickly, and knowing that there is so much out there that you will not handle it, but in a way that you have really also the trust inside yourself that gives you the trust further. And I think this is also very much needed in participatory processes, that it will not always happen like we want to. It will not always happen like we plan to. Even if we look back in the past, and if we look back in the history and see, okay, this is how it worked. We are now in a situation. We are now in a time of history where we all, as a collective, can be liberated and can be really free in the way how we act, live, learn, deal. And this is a very new area. This is what we have not experienced so far. So in my point of view, so this is very interesting. Okay, how can we together go into the field of the unknown and have kind of the confidence that we don't know where it leads us. Many people have been very close to it, but none of us can really see how far the future will bring us. What we are doing now in Present, the NGO that we are, or the foundation, or whatever you will call it, because we need one, since our system is still in need of this kind of organization form. We are looking at education systems and environment, and schools, issues outside of traditional ways of teaching and learning. And we connect them. We look where are new forms of learning. We're traveling around. We are making hackathons where we also invite local communities exactly around those environments to form themselves. Very organized, very participatory, and in that way, we very often don't need to plan how things should look like. We just have to look back and reflect. Okay, what worked, and what did we learn from the last 2 steps in order to make the next step? We very often think we already have to know the 4th, the 5th step, and this, I think, this is in our times. It's very challenging, very yeah, kind of crazy. And so I think there have been many really good examples where alternatives of education are working. There are really new forms. Many of the young generation, they don't need a university degree, or they don't need a university experience, because they want to create their own education. And I think this is it's a very focal point. We start to really create our own personal education, and this is not related to degrees. This is not related to any industry. This is not related to any economy. Because we are becoming part of I see it really very much as a new generation where we can liberate ourselves very much, and this is what you can see now in Brazil, what's going on. This is also what you can see in various forms in Palestine, which is very much oppressed, which is very much in a form, under occupation. You find it in Israel, you find it in many places all around the world. The people are really waking up and getting out of the normal. And so, yeah, I hope this makes a little bit of sense to all of you.
That's brilliant.
Welcome to the future.
Okay, so Layne, welcome.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
You can. Okay, well, I just have a few comments here. Well, first, I'm going to try to grow my hairstyle the same as those in Firenze, and I hope that it can be at that level by the time I get there this summer. So I'm working on it. The beard, I don't know. I will try. Maybe that's part of the K-coin process that we have to do here. I work as a fellow at the P2P Foundation and also a professor at Sukmyeon University, Women's University in Seoul for Digital Humanities. I have a couple comments here that, first of all, I'd start with that P2P, as I see it, is the productive capacity of civil society. So, for example, governments, states, NGOs, the military, the capitalist sector, corporations, all can produce pharmaceuticals and cars, satellites, biomedical equipment. But civil society, up to this point, has only been able to be involved in political protest. And it's been very powerful, as you know, but it hasn't been able to produce, say, pharmaceuticals. So when Africa tried to, in 2001, when Africa tried to produce their own pharmaceuticals and then a consortium of pharmaceutical companies blocked them, there was no other outlet, African governments, to produce cheaper drugs for AIDS patients. So how do we build a knowledge base for a commons that can have productive capacity come out of that in things like pharmaceuticals and other things that we need? So that's one thesis there. I think that, as you know, P2P Foundation is working there in Ecuador that Michelle talked about a moment ago. What he is doing there is basically you have a country that has plenty of natural resources that are exploited and shipped out, but they can leverage that wealth to move from, say, dirty industrialization over into a knowledge economy. And if you have free, libre, and open knowledge, as that term means for Flock Society, then indeed I think that it is possible for it to move over quickly. I mean, if countries don't, if China doesn't do this, if South Korea doesn't do it, and Japan, there's going to be major societies in decline. So I can speak about East Asia, where I'm at the moment, for one thing. But in that case, in Ecuador, it's a similar kind of thing. They can leverage that wealth that they have to move into a better structure. And at the base of all of this is knowledge. Just as Leif said earlier about the Ragusans 800 years ago. And Leif, I'd like to get some more references to that later on. What Bonnie said a moment ago about access to the commons as being different than necessarily P2P productive capacity is interesting, because we do need to have universal access to a commons such that no one's left out. But that doesn't mean that on top of that commons that a P2P productive capacity, or productive communities, as Michelle calls it, could be, they could be built on top of that to make biomedical products, educational products, and so on. And so could a capitalist economy, such as Jeremy Rifkin talks about. So I think that all of these things are compatible as long as we have that fundamental basis of the commons. And Michelle can talk more about that. At the moment, as far as commoning around knowledge and education in South Korea, the historian Hung-Gil Kim is a colleague of mine. He's the founder of the Korea Center for Digital Humanities, uh, he's working to make the world's knowledge available to students here in Korea in higher education, and then of course moving on to other sectors of education of the children. And then for the rest of Asia, there's a MOOC an open courses platform that's the beginning of this. And as they hang out with Bonnie last night, she and I discussed this, and then what's the next generation of more simplexity, she calls it, for education. And I think that perhaps she and Hyung-Hyul Kim can talk sometime about that. Finally, I want to make a comment about what we're facing in the near future. And I'm very cautious to speak about the future beyond, say, 5 or 10 years, specifically for what Michelle talked about as the in 2030, this kind of perfect storm he mentioned is something that the physicists are saying we can't see beyond. What it means is that the complexification of things will be to a point that we can't even predict beyond that. So whenever you see a government say in 2050 the population will be X, and those are totally erroneous statistics. And so I think that Salvatore's concept here of the near future is the best that we can do for anything, not just for education. But in the case of education, what we see happening is, if you think about how much data and information is produced each day, probably since maybe 1980, more information has been produced than ever in the history of humankind, and that will become yearly, and then every 6 months, every 3 months, and perhaps even daily, more information produced than was before 1980. If you can get an idea of this, it's not going to be possible to process that data. So what we think is going to have to happen is there's going to have to be algorithms that we set up that will interpret the real world for us, and then we're going to need convergence groups that can facilitate the education of students. So I call these convergence teams or convergence groups, and they have to have what they used to call multidisciplinary studies and what we just call convergence today, working together to try to make sense of the tremendous explosion of data and information. So incidentally, we just released a white paper today on the tragedy at Fukushima and the failure of the technological system. And that was a P2P organized process that began in September. It was a open knowledge process. There were 28 researchers involved, and then the white paper is something like 87 pages with an app for phones. So that's one example that we have from P2P Foundation and the Asia Institute. And I'll end up here with the fact that I not only, how should I say, like Bonnie says, what was done in the past for education is over. The whole thing about organizing and storing data and all that stuff, that's done by machines. How will we facilitate learning from here on using machines as necessary? And so that might be my question to you guys. And then how will it come about with both the universalized access to commons and then P2P structures that will enter in, maybe with the K-coin, like the debate that went on this week. So I'll end there, and thanks a lot for all of you being here, and it's so nice to see you all.
So thanks very much there. So we can take some small comments or reflections there. There are, of course, a great many questions here and thoughts, so we have a lot to discuss, but we'll leave it open here for a few reflections.
I'll make a comment, and maybe it could be a wrap up too. So, when Layne was talking, I was thinking about knowledge is becoming too big to know, and this is especially true as we all work toward distributed forms of knowledge, right? I mean, we're actually, not only is knowledge being created too fast to kind of capture it, but we're all working toward distributed knowledge, and that's going to make this problem or opportunity even greater. That knowledge is too big to know. So I think, and then the other thing is, when I forgot how you framed the question, Layne, but so what do young people need? What young people are intuitively aware that they are now facing an unknown and unknowable future. I mean, this is you speak to them and you go to workshops, and this is what's definitely inside of them. So so for me, it's like what we can provide them is navigation tools. What kind of
Yes.
navigation tools? I don't think
Ex-
we provide them content. We provide them navigation tools, and even then we have to be humble because we need to listen to the structure of their evolving minds for the kinds of navigation tools they need for where they only don't know they know where they're going. I like to tell the story of the March of the Penguins. After the mothers changed the egg to the father and the father changed the eggs to the mothers, and then they all go out and feed, the new babies are sitting there in Antarctica waiting and waiting and waiting. And you know what? The parents aren't coming back. And I tell young people this all the time. Your parents aren't coming back. That's just the truth of it in a future that moves this fast. And so we need to look for natural born leaders coming from that generation and learn to listen to our current work, continue to listen if we're educators into the future that's already been born in some sense to them. So that would be kind of my uh, comment and my reflection. So I think, thanks.